you just mentioned a thing, something important that I wanted to touch on. And how do you decide if you're going to try to reconstruct the radial head versus doing a radial head replacement? How do you figure that out?
The radial head is a more troublesome bone than it looks like. It's very delicate, and normally the fracture is comminuted, and you go. I'll say that plan A, it's almost always tries to fix it, but when you have more than two fragments, probably the chances of you fixing it and getting a good stable reduction and stable joint are low. Sometimes when you're fixing the screws just crack the fragments in two more pieces, and you end up with a lot of pieces or some fixation that will not give you the right amount of stability that you need for that joint. That's not when you're when you're talking about a terrible triad. You have to understand that the radial head is not just a bone, but it's a huge and important part of the joint stability. So I rather say that I'll say that I rather get a replacement to add my stability than get a double fixation that will end up with a questionable stable joint. So probably if there is one fragment in the radial head, I will try to fix anyway. Two fragments, I will still try to fix it, but I have to know that sometimes when you see the CT that there's two fragments, maybe when you are doing the surgery, there are more, and maybe they crack, they break a little bit, or you end up with a conjural fragment that you are not able to fix or to hold it. So it's always advisable to keep in mind that your plan B is replacing it. Sometimes even with partial injury, partial comminuted injury, the remaining fragments are so comminuted that you are not able to fix it. And as I said, we have to recognize that this is the first step to achieve the stability of the joint. So most of the cases in my hands, I feel more comfortable replacing it because I know that will give me more stable and more safe reduction for that step of the surgery.
Awesome.
Sometimes I end up with a fixation so delicate that I say, oh my God, if this radial goes a little bit too posterior, I lose it all. So I rather take it off and put a prosthesis, replace it, so I get the stable joint that's more important in this case, in this terrible triad injury.
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned it because the textbook answer for, as far as when to replace these is just like you said, if there's three or more fragments, just go ahead and do the radial head replacement, and studies show that patients do better with that. And speaking on the um, replacement, another thing that's pretty high yield is just kind of overstuffing of the radiocapitellar joint. What I guess what is your experience on that, and like how do you check to see if the maybe the replacement is too large for the joint?
I believe that the biggest mistake in the elbow when you are talking of replacing the radial head is to think like it's working as another joints like the hip or the elbow. that we have to uh, replace with a big prosthesis so we can fill all the space left with of the fracture. And in the elbow, it's quite different because you don't need a huge process. You don't need to fill all the spaces. Otherwise, you will get end up with overstuffing. That is not good. Will be probably jeopardize your results and function. You have to respect the exact length of the processes, uh, just enough to fill what you need and add a little bit of the stability you are looking for. So I don't use the head, the fragment that I took off to measure. You normally I get the smaller one and test it, and seeing the fluoroscopic image if the process is ending in the same line as the coronoid, uh, if the process is ending proximal to the coronoid, that's probably wrong. That's not something you want to your elbow or to your patient elbow. My main goal is the same line or 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters distal to it. That is exactly what you need to add the like it would be a bone stabilization of the lateral joint, and that with the ligament repair probably will be enough to do that. So in other words, don't fill it up with your processes. Just get the image intensifier and measure exactly what you need. And if you are in doubt of 9 millimeters or 10 millimeters, 9 millimeters or 12 millimeters, go with the smaller one.
Okay. And we spent a lot of time talking about radial head replacements, but I'm just going to mention this and kind of move on to the coronoid. For when you are plating the radial head, and this is something good to know just for just general trauma as far as radial head fractures, not only just some terrible triads. There's like a safety zone that you're looking for that's non-articular throughout the arc of motion of the forearm, and that's where you want to put your radial plate at. It's pretty much a 90 to 110-degree arc from the radial styloid to Lister's tubercle when the arm is in neutral rotation, and that helps to uh, avoid impingement of the ulna throughout supination pronation. So that's one good to know, and definitely high yield as well.